Welcome to Federal Grants Explained, a new series on the GrantsWorks YouTube channel. My name is Patrice Davis, the founder of GrantsWorks and GrantWin Academy. On this channel, I'll shed light on what's happening with federal grant funding, from the funding freeze to agency shutdowns, federal payment systems, what are they, break down what's happening at the Office of Management and Budget, and spotlight how the federal workforce reduction may actually impact federal grants. I'll also feature guests such as former federal employees and other consultants who can help shed some light on what's happening. If you find this topic interesting and valuable, please subscribe and comment below. The comments help the YouTube algorithm share this information with others that you believe would benefit from this information. Also, you can learn more about me and my company, GrantsWorks, in the details below. But I do want to shed some light on who I am and why I am qualified to talk about federal grants. So I'm a federal grant consultant who specializes in post-award management of a federal grant. If you're wondering what the heck that means, here's the example that I typically use. Say you're the chief financial officer of a local museum. Your local museum has always received grants from private sources. So that's private individuals, corporations, from private foundations. Then all of a sudden, your director of development comes into your office and says, hey, we applied for this $10 million federal grant, and we've gotten this $10 million federal grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. That is a federal agency. Now, this CFO is going to have to monitor that federal grant, monitor the spending for that federal grant, and so many other things for that federal grant in a different way that they would have done with the private sources of funding. I wouldn't say just in a different way. They have to monitor it more closely because, of course, federal grants and other public grants, let's say a grant from a state agency or a local agency, which could also be federally sourced, by the way, are public funds. They're taxpayer dollars, and so you have to treat them differently. So there are systems, processes, and procedures that CFO is going to have to put in place to make sure that the organization is using the federal grant the way it was intended to be used. And so as a federal grant consultant, we come in and we help that organization set up the systems, processes, and procedures in order to be able to do that, because there are audits and certain things that federal grantees have to make sure that they're prepared for. And so that's what I do and what my firm does. So wanted to provide a little bit of background on that. And so that's why I can speak on the topic, because I have a lot of experience in that. So just a little bit more about what I bring to the table in terms of some knowledge about this. I've managed millions of dollars in research and non-research grants for nonprofits, for businesses, and educational institutions. I'm a former federal employee. I actually worked at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We know it as CDC. I'm a certified grant management specialist, and there are only about 300 of us in the country. And I used to actually conduct site visits of state agencies that receive federal grants. And then after those site visits, we used to have to prepare these really, really long site visit reports where I had to identify the sites and the laws that the state agency either complied with or didn't comply with. So quite a bit of experience with federal grants. I've also obtained and managed federal grants as a recipient, subrecipient, and pass-through entity. And our firm created a federal grant management training series for a federal agency that's consistently rated 4.5 out of 5 stars. Over, I believe, 600 people rated it 4.5 out of 5 stars as of the last time I checked, which was, I believe, in November. So really, pretty proud of that. And I've shared what I've learned about federal grants over the years on podcasts and even on a few stages. So I've been blessed to interact with federal grants from a number of angles, and I've witnessed how these grants save lives, help communities of all types, so either geographical, such as urban or rural communities, or communities of interest, such as education, art, innovation. So federal grants do fund quite a few things around our country. So why I decided to create this video, I decided to create the video because I realized there was a gap in content about what's happening to federal grants and other federal financial assistance. And I believe that the perspective of a grant professional that specializes in federal grants and who happens to be a former federal employee would be a great addition to the information that's out there. I've seen channels recently with very large audiences under-explaining or intentionally, misinforming their audiences about what's happening. And this, I believe, spreads even more confusion for Americans. And so I decided to try to clarify some of what's happening. Some of what I'm about to explain, I've already shared on social media and in our community's email newsletter to, we have thousands of people on our email newsletter. This video will put it together, I think, in just one place and include some of my own opinions about what's happening. By the way, this is one of several videos about the topic. This one is going to be longer than the other videos because this is going to try to summarize everything that's happened over the past week or so. But don't forget to subscribe, by the way. I'll be, again, releasing a new video each week. So I want you to know when the next one is released. So that was a long intro, but I do think for this first video it was really needed. But I'm ready to really get into it. So here we go. Before the infamous OMB, and OMB again stands for Office of Management and Budget memo that we've all heard about, agency heads were sending notices. So just want to make sure you guys were aware of this. Were sending notices to their grantees that they were moving aggressively to implement the current president's executive order, specifically the one entitled Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing. One particular agency, the Department of Energy, announced it was directing the suspension of those activities in any loans, loan guarantees, grants, cost sharing agreements, contracts, contract awards, and any other source of Department of Energy funds. Specifically, they were targeting the following: DEI programs and activities, community benefit plans, Justice 40 requirements, conditions, and principles. And some of these I'm going to be explaining further in the video, and then I also have a couple of individual videos explaining some of these topics because I think that would help the audience and the community know a little bit more about what was in place and what's being removed. So also on Monday, January 27th, specifically in the evening, the Office of Management and Budget released memo M2513, directing heads of federal executive departments and agencies to pause agency grants, loans, and other financial assistance effective January 28th, 2025. So the very next day. I just want to make sure so the very next day, they were supposed to pause all grants, loans, and other financial assistance. So as you can see, by 5 p.m. the next day. So I just want to make sure I really stress that. The memo went to agency heads. It was meant to direct agency heads to analyze all federal financial assistance to determine which did not align with the new president's executive orders or the returning president's executive orders and they wanted to make sure that the funding that they wanted to be paused, didn't fund initiatives such as what they call DEI, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal. So that language was specifically in the memo. Now, this was a very big deal, and I'm going to give you 3 reasons, just 3, there are more, why this was such a big deal. So number 1, the pause was effective the very next day. Number 2, the pause impacted the following institutions, right? So I just want to make sure, I'm going to explain now the different types of organizations that get federal grants. So state agencies, local government agencies, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, yes, so colleges and universities, private and public, businesses, school districts, health facilities, tribal and territorial governments, and more. So that's the second reason. The third reason is just to give to shed some light on how much federal funding, federal grants are awarded and kind of are included in our economy. Just want to give you an example. The federal government awarded $1 to $2 trillion. I don't have the exact numbers. $1 to $2 trillion in federal grants in 2024 alone. And as you can see in a video that I have coming up, you can see just how much money was being paused. Again, that was fiscal year 2024. Some of those grants, some of those monies that you'll see on the chart were maybe one-year grants. Many are multi-year grants. And so they could have, what you saw for 2024 could have started in 2022, but it's continued to 2025, and that's included in fiscal year 2024. What you saw in that, or see in that video could be a grant that was awarded in fiscal year 2024, but again, doesn't end until 2026. So I wanted to, just provide some clarity that the numbers that you see here are numbers that reflect multi-year grants, and some also reflect one-year grants. So I just want to give you a heads up on that. Not that many that I've seen that were just one-year grants, but they exist. So you can see just how much money was being paused. That's the third reason. And I just wanted to make sure that you also know that the video that you see that's coming up was just the primary awards, not the thousands of sub-grants and sub-awards that were awarded from those primary awards that you'll see on the screen. So there are primary recipients, and then there are subrecipients of federal grants. What you'll see on the screen are just the primary recipients. The subrecipients received funds from those subrecipients. So we're not talking about more money, we're just talking about more impacted organizations. So I wanted to show you just how much federal grants have been awarded just in fiscal year 2024 alone. So I'm on a website called usaspending.gov, and for those of us in the federal grant space, we're familiar with this resource, and I'm glad I'm recording it now just in case anything changes. But you can see that I chose two filters for fiscal year 2024, and I selected all grants. I did not, break it down further, which I could by geography, by recipient type, but I wanted to show you just how much in federal grants were awarded just in fiscal year 2024. The first thing you'll probably notice that meant the grants that are the largest have been awarded to state agencies. See that, just want to remind everyone that grants are awarded to different types of entities, state agencies being one of them. California is the top 5, New York State, and of course, Texas. And you can see the amounts that were awarded. Pennsylvania, of course. Now, these are really large grants that are awarded to states for different kinds. I think for Medicare and Medicaid, that's not my area of expertise, but just know, as you can see, the Ohio Department of Medicaid. Now, I'm going to go a little bit further down. What I like about this results is that it shows you what agency awards the most. This is something that I've known for some time. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has awarded $778 billion in federal grants to states, to universities, to different types of institutions just in fiscal year 2024 alone. As you can see, Department of Transportation, Education, and Agriculture are next. And then this breaks it down by month, and you get to see the outlays basically of federal grants. And then there's more information that you can see by geography. So I just wanted to give you all a visual so you can see just how far-reaching and large federal grants are. I plan on sharing much more about this over the next several weeks, but I did want to start here so you all could see just how much federal grants are a part of the U.S. economy. To be clear, again, there are research and non-research grants awarded to businesses to fund innovation, grants that fund homelessness programs, grants that fund and support victims of domestic violence, grants that fund child care programs. There are Medicare grants. There are Medicaid grants that are typically awarded to states. There are community development block grants that are typically awarded to local government agencies. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of just the breadth of grant funding that was being awarded and why it was such a big deal, and everyone just sort of erupted when this was announced. Let me clarify. I don't know if CDBG, Community Development Block Grants, are also awarded to state agencies. I'm familiar with the ones that are awarded to local government agencies, such as your local county government. And of course, yes, there are grants that fund global health and global development initiatives around the world. Many of those global programs were funded through the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. Many of you already know that USAID has been, I'll use the word disbanded or folded into the State Department, and many employees have been terminated, or, I can't properly describe the ways that some of them have been, now unemployed. Maybe they're laid off. Maybe I don't know the proper terminology. I know that many contractors, in other words, there were contractors that were implementing the work being done by USAID. Many of them were terminated. So I just wanted to give you some more insight into what's happening and how USAID was a part of that. Now, I won't go into whether USAID is a CIA front, as some people have said, but it was always clear that aid programs are, of course, how the U.S. uses its soft power. And of course, many of the aid programs were awarded and administered by USAID. And as a matter of fact, throughout all of my videos, what I'll do is try to present the facts as I know them. So, please share any comments that will clarify anything that I share or provide a different perspective. But, I'm sharing everything that I've learned and seen with my own eyes over the past couple of weeks. All right. It's interesting. I actually managed a multi-million-dollar USAID grant, and so I do have some experience with that agency and with funding from that agency. On the very next day, the White House releases another memo, this one to clarify the first memo, announcing a federal financial assistance pause. According to the clarifying memo, any program not implicated by the president's executive orders, when we talk about the president, we're talking about, of course, the current president's executive orders, was not subject to the pause because they realized that the way that the first memo was worded was alarming, and it caused alarms across the country. And they went on to further say that any program that provides direct benefits to individuals is not subject to the pause. Any payment required by law to be paid will be paid without interruption or delay. And I do think that's important to understand. Any payment required by law. And according to the new memo, a pause could be as short as a day, and that OMB had been working with agencies and had already approved many programs to continue even before the pause had gone into effect. So this is their attempt at trying to, calm folks' nerves. But again, that first memo was so alarming that everyone stood up, paid very, very close attention. The second memo, I'm not sure how much it did to calm, nerves across the country. One topic that has come up over and over again is the president's ability to use the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 to claw back federal funds that were already obligated. And some of the language in the executive orders that were written in that first week and really call some of that into question. And I'll explain more over the coming days as I release more and more videos. But the second memo did address this issue by noting that the pause is not an impoundment under the Impoundment Control Act. I kept focusing on by law in a few minutes ago because some of the grants, many of the grants that were being paused are grants that were authorized by laws, and legal experts, many agree that terminating either the disbursement or obligation of grant funding from a grant that was authorized by a law calls a lot of things into question. Again, I'm not a legal scholar, so I can't speak to that, but that is something that we should really, really pay close attention to. And I'm curious to see how things are going to unfold in the coming weeks. So it's interesting. I have that right here. In the coming weeks, we have to pay very close attention to the use of impoundment, and how it may be used to justify certain actions, clawback actions, if those are still attempted. So later the same day, a federal judge, Judge Lauren Ali Khan, who's the district judge in the District of Columbia, ordered a temporary administrative stay that became effective just minutes before the pause was to take effect at 5 p.m. The stay was prompted by a lawsuit brought by the National Council of Nonprofits, and I believe 2 or 3 other organizations. The lawsuit sued the Office of Management and Budget and its acting director, Matthew Bayeth. I hope I'm not pronouncing his name incorrectly. And then the plaintiffs argued that the guidance will have, quote, devastating impact on nonprofits that receive government grants, which depend on those federal funds. Those federal funds, having worked at several nonprofits, I've worked at, I believe, four nonprofits in my career. And so they really do, they fund not just salaries, because there are program professionals that are implementing these programs. They fund the programs. They fund, there's just so many areas of a nonprofit or operation that are partially covered by a federal grant. And so, of course, it makes sense that this group came together and decided to file a lawsuit. On the very next day, OMB Memo 2513 was rescinded as announced in Memo M2514 with just 2 sentences. And the sentences were, OMB Memorandum M2513 is rescinded. If you have questions about implementing the President's executive orders, please contact your agency general counsel. Again, these memos are directed to federal agency executives, and federal agency heads. So just want to make sure we're just reminded you of that. Now, one of the things I pointed out before is that federal grants are typically known for their reliability and typically larger award amounts. And so the sudden proposed widespread freeze announced in a 2-page memo really added a lot of chaos and uncertainty where typically none exists, except, as I noted before, when there's a pending government shutdown. So I do want to make sure that you're aware of why it was such a quote unquote big deal when so many grants were being frozen without proper explanation, and just so much funding at stake. One of the recommendations that I've made to our community is to review your federal grant terms. I've shared before that sometimes grantees, they get their notice of award or their grant agreement and they pay attention to what's on the front page, the budget on the front page, maybe the project period, which is really the range of the grant period, and a few other details. But as I've shared in a number of webinars before, that your award obligations are in your grant agreement's terms and conditions. And that's, one of the things that I have tried to emphasize over the years. We also learned that the administration announced that it was offering all federal workers a buyout with 7 months pay in an effort to shrink the size of the government. I shared elsewhere that when the federal workforce shrinks, this can potentially also impact federal awarding agencies' ability to administer existing grants and other federal financial assistance, because federal agencies have in-house grant management officers and grant management specialists who provide federal regulatory guidance to in-house subject matter experts. So they provide the guidance to their project officers, in-house project officers, and they provide guidance to the grantees. Federal agencies also have, like I said, project or program officers who oversee the programmatic work that's being done by federal grantees. And as a former federal CDC employee, I actually collaborated with research grantees, and I saw how much they relied on the expertise of both the program officials, or the SMEs, and of course the grant officials. Also SMEs in their own right. They are subject matter experts in federal grants. That buyout, as of today, has reportedly resulted in about 40,000 federal workers accepting the resignation offer, again, as of today. Today, the day I'm recording this video, is the deadline for federal workers to decide if they'll resign or stay. So that number may go up by the time you watch this video. I also want to provide a little bit of perspective. There are approximately 2.3 million federal workers, and the new administration's target is 10%. They were expecting 10% of them to take up the deferred resignation offer. So again, curious to see how that pans out. It's been reported, I haven't been able to verify this, that they basically, federal agency heads have said, okay, well, since we don't have enough space and we're really trying to reduce the workforce, then it's been reported that they're being terminated because there really isn't enough space for federal workers to come back to the office. So I haven't been able to verify that. So make sure you verify that before you spread that one out, okay? So later in the day, again, this all started on the 27th. We're now just talking about what happened on the 29th. It was also reported in the media that a second judge, Chief Judge John J. McConnell Jr. of the U.S. District Court of Rhode Island, would grant a restraining order to halt the funding freeze, even though the memo itself announced a rescission. The idea was that, states attorneys generals convinced that judge that the Trump administration was likely to continue with the funding halt detailed in the memo based on what was actually announced by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. In other words, they realized they rescinded the memo, but we believe that they're still doing what they said they've done. They just decided to rescind the memo. So a ruling from McConnell would be the second order by a judge blocking the Trump administration from implementing a spending pause on certain grant and loan programs and, of course, other federal financial assistance. That same week, I participated in a quickly coordinated webinar about the state of federal grants and shared some of my insight. Here are some of the highlights of what I shared during that webinar. I'll start with some of the key funding areas that we need to be aware of. The first one is any grants funded by the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. The correct name is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was signed in 2021 by President Biden, and the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Those grants are authorized by a law, and as I said before, legal experts expect that an executive order may not be able to block grants already obligated by these laws. Another thing to point out here is that much of the funding from those laws went to state government agencies. And again, that's a big deal. So I'm not sure what will happen with that. I have a few hunches, but I won't share my hunches here because, they're just hunches. I'd rather wait to see what happens and then share it with you guys in another video. I also was suggesting that we look to see what happens with any grant from any agency that included DEI metrics or initiatives, any DEI performance measures or initiatives. And we've seen over the past week that those are being stripped out of many grants. I also said we need to look for any grants from any agency that required a community benefits plan. We've seen that. Any grant from any agency that included NEPA compliance. NEPA stands for the National Environmental Policy Act. And that is a law that basically says, it says a lot, but it basically says that if federal grants are going to be used for any infrastructure construction project, that's any kind of, project that's going to disturb the environment, so to speak, there are certain environmental reviews and environment assessments that need to be conducted before the work can begin. And so those grants won't be cut, but it's expected that NEPA requirements will be modified or they'll be streamlined if they haven't already. I haven't seen any news about that, but with everything that's happening, it's really easy to miss some of what's happening. And I also said we need to look out for those grants that reflect President Biden's Executive Order 14008 titled Climate Crisis Executive Order, because that's the one that brought about Justice 40, the Justice 40 initiative, the Environmental Justice Scorecard, and other environmental justice initiatives. The Justice 40 initiative required agencies to direct 40% of the benefits of federal climate programs to historically excluded communities. And it is why so many organizations around the country, ones that don't typically get federal grants, were receiving federal grants or federal funding, whether grants or cooperative agreements and even contracts for green energy, environmental justice, solar farms, just quite a few. I've actually worked on quite a few applications and actually had clients that received funding likely as a result of this initiative. In the final year, in fact, of the previous administration, there were constant announcements from the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, from the U.S. Department of Energy, and from the U.S. Department of Transportation, and also, I believe, even from the U.S. Department of Labor, that, all of these different organizations, Native American, tribal governments, just different kinds of community-based organizations were receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in federal grants. So I do want to make sure that you understand how important it is that these grants fund jobs they fund projects, they fund grant funded contracts. So these grants were bringing extraordinary change to communities, again, specifically historically excluded communities around the country. So I'm hoping you're starting to see the complete picture as to why Justice 40 was considered is something that they want to pull out of, the Justice 40 initiatives are those that they're also targeting. I also shared with attendees of that webinar that the Justice 40 initiative was actually interwoven into 518 programs across 19 agencies. So federal agencies are very, very busy trying to pull out into Justice 40 initiatives and related activities out of 518 programs across 19 federal agencies. So just wanted to kind of summarize that for you guys. And if you're wondering what is Justice 40, you want to know a little bit more about Justice 40, I do plan on recording a video about that. So let me know in the comments if you want me to share a little bit more about Justice 40 and just some of the things that you'd like to learn about it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because I'll be sharing details about quite a few things that are related to federal grants, but also very much connected to what's happening in the news. But again, my goal is to try to share that information without, interweaving my opinions. I have very strong opinions about some of these. I just want to present the facts as I see them. And again, open myself up to any corrections. And you can certainly do that in the comments below. Now we're going to focus a little bit on the U.S. Department of Education. As of the day I recorded this video, the executive order or the series of executive orders that are expected to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education are being drafted by the administration. You may be wondering why the U.S. Department of Education? Why would anybody want to do that? Well, the administration and GOP leadership and many, in the conservative area believe that education should be in the hands of state education agencies because they want to, quote, stop the abuse of taxpayer dollars to indoctrinate America's youth. And I'm going to provide a brief history lesson about this, just to kind of pull it all together. The Education Department was created from legislation in 1979 by then President Jimmy Carter to make it a cabinet level agency, since apparently back then federal education initiatives were housed and implemented from other federal agencies. So I guess other federal agencies had like an education department and they would actually, or division, and education initiatives were executed or administered from several agencies. Then it was decided, hey, let's go ahead and give them their own cabinet level agency. And that's how the U.S. Department of Education was born. There's a little bit more history to that, but you can definitely find that out. I do know also there's also been concerns about what some perceive as the so-called power of teachers unions. And so, it's just something that to look into and learn a little bit about that history as well. Republican leadership and many other Republicans also believe that the Education Department has resulted in what they call, quote, federal intrusion into classrooms and a liberal stronghold on the higher education system. And so, of course, the recent culture wars over racial equity and LGBTQ issues more than likely further convince them that this is the case. And I also want to point out, I'm not an education policy expert. I'm not even an educator, so I can't really comment on it. But the only thing I will share is that I don't know what's going to happen if we have education managed at the state level. In my mind, that means that we'll probably have 50 different standards of education, because we do know that the difference between what's happening in education in Mississippi is vastly different from what's happening in education in terms of the K-12 education in the state of Massachusetts. And I wonder what these disparate standards and implementation models, what it will do to the U.S.'s ranking beyond its current ranking as number 13 in the world, behind countries like New Zealand and Germany. But as I said before, currently Massachusetts reportedly has the best school system according to district administration, and we do know that states such as Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and some of the others are way in the bottom. In other words, like ranking number 45 to 50 across the 50 states. So just something to consider, something I've considered. So I do wonder what that will look like. It also makes me wonder if the education department is dismantled and now we have 50 different models, potentially 50 different models. Will there be a rush to Massachusetts and Connecticut and New Jersey and Maryland and even Wisconsin? Those are the states that apparently have the best school systems according to an organization called District Administration. So I'm now going to go back to to usaspending.gov. That's where I showed you that first video, to take a look at the grants awarded in fiscal year 2024 from the U.S. Department of Education. So I'm going to drop that video in now. And so this time I've decided to go back to usaspending.gov. This time I'm looking at all grants awarded in fiscal year 2024 by the U.S. Department of Education. And so just a quick scroll here, you can see at the very top, Accenture Federal Services actually had quite a large grant. As you can see, Accenture is here again. Pennsylvania Department of Education Assistance Agency, and it keeps, we keep going. And so again, these are the results of grantees awarded in 2024. You see Nelnet there a couple of times as well. We're going to keep going. Research Triangle Institute, well-known research institute. Now, what I'd like to do is, and you see the numbers here that they've actually been awarded. I'm now going to go over and I'm going to change the recipient type to a nonprofit, right? And I'll make it nonprofits, foundations, community development corporations. And then I'm going to resubmit. So as you can see at the top, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Serving Our Children, KIPP Foundation, Special Olympics. These are some of the organizations that I'm not sure what's going to happen once the U.S. Department of Education is dismantled, has been announced. Maybe there'll be education arms in different federal agencies, as was the case before 1979 when Jimmy Carter created the U.S. Department of Education through legislation. And so if an executive order by the current administration is able to supersede the requirements of legislation, and I don't know, I'm not a legal scholar, it would be interesting to see, but I did want you all to see the types of organizations: John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, the Opportunity Trust. As I said before, universities have foundations, New Schools for New Orleans. All of these organizations, I'm just curious to know what the dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education will mean for these nonprofit recipients of grants from the U.S. Department of Education. So I hope that this video provides a comprehensive overview of what has happened and what is projected to happen with federal financial assistance, specifically federal grants, since that's my area of expertise and what I can speak on. I do want to point out that I haven't even touched on the hundreds of billions of dollars of grants authorized by those two landmark laws that the current administration deems to be misaligned with their policies and beliefs. So, that is something that we should really be taking a look at. I haven't touched on the vague emails that were sent from federal officials informing grantees that they can no longer communicate with them, or the disappearing and then in some instances reappearing of grant funding notices on grants.gov. And grants.gov, for those of you who don't know, that's where many, but not all, federal grant notices are posted for the public to view and learn more about that particular grant funding opportunity. Or they're typically like 20,000 at a time on the website. Just want to give you a heads up on what that is. Folks can actually also apply to grants from grants.gov. And that's also where updates about a grant notice are published. So grants.gov is a system that people rely on to find out about federal grants that are available. I also didn't touch on the review panels at health agencies that were paused as a result of everything that was happening. So there are people on our team that actually participate in federal review panels, and their review panel was canceled and then it, resumed quickly. So just a lot of confusion. I also didn't touch on what happened at the National Institutes of Health. So I do plan on covering that as well. So just want to make sure you're aware that there is even more that I didn't cover in this video because I didn't want the video to be extraordinarily long, too long. But I did want to at least provide you all with a pretty good overview of what's happened in the past couple of weeks. So again, if you found this video valuable, please share it as far and wide as possible. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to check out the links to learn about my consulting firm, GrantWorks, and to learn about GrantWorks Academy, including our federal grant funding and management training series. That training is certified by CFRE, that's Certified Fundraising Executive, and also certified by GPCI, I think it's Grant Professional Certification Institute. And we do have other certifications underway. So again, I'm Patrice Davis. Thanks for watching this very first episode of Federal Grants Explained. I hope you found it valuable. If you have questions, drop them in the comments below. I'll be taking a look to try to answer some questions as soon as I can. Until the next video, goodbye.